Hello, everybody. You're very welcome to the Just Transition and Climate Justice discussion today. My name is Jamie Gorman. I'm the convener of the Climate Justice Working Group with Community Work Ireland. And in my day job, I'm a lecturer in community development at Maynooth University. Liam McGlynn is, sorry, just got a prompt saying Liam wants to join us. So I'm delighted to be here as the chair of today's session. We're going to continue the format that we had at the plenary, a conversational approach. And we've got two fantastic conversational partners to kick us off. Later on then, of course, we'll open it up to conversations from the group and an opportunity for everybody to join in. So to introduce our first conversational partners, first of all, I'd like to welcome Mary T. McBride from Changemakers, which is a Donegal-based development education project that connects local and global development issues, working with adults in Donegal. And it's a really interesting project founded by Self-Help Africa, the Donegal Education and Training Board, and Inishowen Development Partnership. So a fascinating example of a local project responding to the issues of climate change in rural Ireland. And we're also joined by Jerry MacEvilly from Friends of the Earth Ireland. Jerry is the head of policy for Friends of the Earth. And Friends of the Earth is a global network of environmental justice focused campaigning organizations. And in Ireland, their mission is to campaign and build movement power to bring about the system change needed for a just world where people and nature thrive. So we're looking forward to having both the local and the national, both the practice and the policy, and bringing them into conversation with each other. So to begin, my first question for both Mary and Jerry is actually for them to consider, what is the conversation that needs to happen now in relation to climate change and community development?
Yeah, great. Well, I might start, Jerry, if that's okay with you. I suppose just to start with a bit of a quick disclaimer, unlike Jerry, I'm not an expert on climate change and policy, so I'll leave that side of things to him.
Welcome back. So before I hand over to you, Mary, I just want to introduce Lisa Ennis, who's a community worker with Kildare County Council, and Lisa has very kindly volunteered to be our note taker today. And the one outcome that we're being asked to get to by the end of this session is to identify what our one call for action on the theme of climate justice and the just transition for community workers is. So our call to action on this topic. So back over to you, Mary. And
yeah, great. Thanks for that, Jamie. Yeah, I suppose so. The disclaimer done. I'm going to leave the policy side of things to Jerry. I work for, as Jamie said, a local community development organisation. So I'm a community worker, like many of you. And I suppose Inishowen Development Partnership 10 years ago made the investment in a project to support adults and communities across Donegal. So it's a county-wide initiative to take action on sustainability issues generally, of which climate action is a major part. And from our experience to date, I suppose what's the conversation that needs to happen? I think it's very much about starting or remembering that community work is about meeting people where they are, and our role in supporting climate action is no different. Another, I suppose, point of convergence would be the need for a whole of community approach, working with different actors at community level to look at different climate actions that we can take. For our work, I suppose the first step in that conversation has been about first understanding where the entry point is for different actors we work with in Donegal and what the barriers are to where we need to get them to. Sometimes it's been about basic awareness raising with a call to action to consider energy and water use or recycling and upcycling, for example. Other times it's been about supporting activists and groups already leading the way in our community. So for example, we've been working alongside groups across Donegal to establish a Donegal Food Growers Network. And we also support with micro grants, quite small sort of seed funding for climate actions. And then sometimes it's about creating and sustaining bigger initiatives. So we launched an energy master plan for Inishowen, and we're going to be launching the establishment of our first smart villages in Inishowen. So you can see there's a spectrum, I suppose, and it's just to be aware of that spectrum in your space and where you might need to start that conversation. I suppose the second point and related is about messaging, and that's really critical. And what we found is, you need to recognize that different groups that we engage with need to hear the climate message in different ways. So for example, whether that's, regenerative agriculture as an entry point with the farming community, sustainable production and consumption with businesses and consumers, or education for sustainable development for those of us who are also working with the FET sector and those training providers in our community. I believe our role as community workers, though, is ultimately, and I think just what Mike Ryan's words about, inequity and social inclusion. I think our role in that conversation is about ensuring equality of access and engagement in the conversation of what a just transition needs to look like. I suppose we're all in the business of addressing different types of disadvantage in our communities, and many of the problems facing the people and communities we work with are actually increasingly impacted by climate change. In this sense, climate and just transition can no longer, I suppose, be viewed as an add-on to our work, but a golden thread issue. New issues we find emerging in our work here are, environmental poverty, green energy poverty. And if we're looking at, the move to the green economy and our work with lifelong learning, how can we ensure, green skills and technology learning opportunities are affordable and accessible to all? I think our challenge as a sector is to maybe understand the relationship between climate and just transition and the different issues we work on, and to be able to articulate that a bit better. I suppose my final point I think I wanted to make today was that I suppose we have to recognize as well, not to be negative, but that community development on our own, we're limited. However, you need to acknowledge, I suppose, the different levels of responsibility and power within all of this. And I suppose we find that communities and groups can become quite quickly disengaged and frustrated when we ask the seemingly impossible of them. And I suppose, impossible in the sense that wider policy measures are needed beyond individual level action. So investments in, infrastructures and supports for a just transition need to be put in place to support communities to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change. And I suppose a final point I'd like to make and link to this idea of responsibility, and again, indeed, the title of today's conference is that I suppose we need to ensure that we put the language of rights back into the discussion, and the right to healthy environment, looking at how climate change and indeed responses to it can have a big impact on different rights that we have, whether that's food, right to health, or economic rights, other social rights. And I suppose as community workers, I think we play a real pivotal role in ensuring rights and equality are at the center of local level climate actions, and then in turn to be able to engage policy and decision makers to better support and resource climate action that is truly just. Yeah, I suppose, yeah, that would be.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, some really interesting things there. I mean, the importance that's standing out for me is of starting where people are at and listening to where people are at in order to be able to tailor the message and the communication, but also the supports that you put in place and the ways in which you engage them, whether that be the micro grants or the energy master plan and everything in between that you've mentioned. I thought it was a really important point there that you made at the end around the levels of responsibility and the need for a structural lens so that the responsibility doesn't get placed on individuals in the community. Because of course, when it comes back to rights and justice, when that happens, there's a double burden placed on those who are already disadvantaged, who are expected to do more with less to respond to the crisis. And so I suppose that's where the issue of policy comes in, policy and advocacy, and taking a justice and equality lens in policy making. So I'd like to invite Jerry now to kick us off from the policy angle and share a few thoughts around the importance of that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jamie, and thanks again for the opportunity to speak. I have a few notes here which I'm going to run through, and do feel free to interrupt me if I'm going on for too long. But first of all, just the obvious point. So the government does need to make community consultation and empowerment a really core element of our climate policy making, as opposed to an additional or even secondary feature. And I should start by saying that there are legal obligations on government to do this under human rights, climate and environmental law. So this is not simply an ask or a good idea, it's a requirement. But as I said, it needs to be a core part of the process and not a tick box exercise, which Dr. McBride also noted. But what do I mean? I appreciate like policy making can be extremely abstract. But to give an example, this year the government consulted on a new climate action plan and also on a separate new plan for the Sustainable Development Goals, and gathered the views of the public and stakeholders in the form of both an individual and group questionnaire, or individual submissions and also questionnaires. And questionnaires may be easier for members of the public to respond to. It's easier than having to write a lengthy submission. But what's really needed as well are in-person exchanges in the form of town hall events, assemblies, direct meetings between central and local, direct meetings with individuals and communities, with central and local government on proposed climate actions. And there's also a real need for a national stakeholder forum, a permanent body to facilitate ongoing dialogue and exchange with government on climate action. And it's particularly important that these tools for consultation, participation and exchange focus in on the most impacted, those most impacted and at risk, and they go beyond the usual stakeholders. And I include the likes of Friends of the Earth as one of the usual stakeholders. So it goes beyond that level. And this requires more resources, more boots on the ground, more training, and more recruitment of the right type of people in government departments and local authorities. But we've seen the benefits, and there are some positive examples. So when climate impacts were presented to the Citizens Assembly in 2018, the citizens came back, or that group of citizens came back with some very considered and insightful recommendations across the sectors. I'm also aware that EirGrid and previously the Department of Foreign Affairs have really led some really positive public consultations where they have created citizens groups, and they've created town hall events. We also do need to look at how PPNs and sustainable energy communities are operating, and I think they need greater assistance from government departments to support local climate action plans that are aligned with our national climate action plan and the SDGs. And just a further example that I want to give is that Friends of the Earth, together with the Stop Climate Chaos Coalition, launched last year our One Future campaign for faster and fair climate action. And as part of that, a really core element was the establishment of One Future groups, which are citizens groups in constituencies across the country. And these local groups, they're not coordinated by Friends of the Earth, although we have facilitated them, but they're designed to be self-sustaining and led by local citizens. So they were able to engage politicians directly on climate action in the run-up to the election last year. And also there was an online mass lobby that we also organised that people were able to engage in. And I'll share the link for the One Future groups in a second, and in the chat box. And just to finish, you can guess that if we want to ensure buy-in from local communities, early engagement and participation is key. But it also means, that individuals and communities have the most informed knowledge on how to progress climate actions and prevent climate impacts in their area. So that could mean which areas would benefit the most from more public transport and cycling, which houses are the most urgent need of retrofitting, which estates are most dependent on burning coal or peat in their fires for home heating, which communal land could benefit from community gardens. I'm reading off a list here. Which roads are clogged up with car pollution? Which areas are most prone to flooding, or where's there been the biggest loss of wildlife, or where there are the greatest risks and opportunities? So as I said, it's not simply that it's a good idea. It's absolutely central to making sure government puts in place the right type of climate action in the right areas and addresses the greatest inequalities. I'll leave it there for the moment.
Thanks, Jerry. Alan, I see your hand up, but before I get to you, if you don't mind, I just want to go back to Mary on this point around consultation. And I wonder, Mary, if you could say a bit about what you feel would support community workers to enable communities to effectively participate in consultation and decision making around the transition.
Yeah, absolutely. It sparked my thinking about going back to the process behind the energy master plan, maybe to use that as an example. So I think, when you're asking, what would help, I think, well, what's the challenge, right? And I suppose the challenge for us when we were looking at sustainable energy is, as a team, we were sort of thinking, well, God, this is so technical and it's inaccessible for us. And so it's about, first off, trying to make the discussion more accessible to people. And in the energy master plan process, we teamed up with I think with Sligo IT, who did the research for us, and so they had all the technical expertise, and then we worked together. So it's about, I think, collaborating across, cross collaboration on these things, like with the likes of Friends of the Earth as well, who have all that technical knowledge, and maybe building those bridges a little bit more. And the second thing was around, I suppose, the process. So again, Jerry already touched on this, saying about town hall meetings and different methods that we know work and that we know, enable maybe harder to reach groups to engage in these conversations. So again, the energy master plan had a long lead-in consultation, and the main sort of aim behind it was leave no one behind in whatever actions we're talking about. Like, what would just transition look like on the peninsula, and to ensure that. So yeah, I suppose connecting and then using the methods that we know, that's our area of expertise, right? That work. Yeah.
So really valuing the expertise of the community sector in terms of reaching out, identifying hard to reach groups and communities and supporting them in a participatory process alongside the technical and engineering expertise of the ITs or the SEAI, the likes of those organizations. Yeah, that makes sense. Alan, thanks for your patience.
Thanks. No, just we're talking about town hall meetings and meeting, I suppose, reaching people whose voices aren't heard and also engaging policymakers. We have my colleague, reporter Grace Barrett, is on a bicycle at this minute cycling 56 miles or 90 kilometers to Longford town, and she's aware of this conference going on the whole lot. She's doing all the greenways in Ireland, and it's a practical way of, she got hit by a thunderstorm yesterday, so she only met two people on a bridge fishing with a magnet hook, right? If you've never heard of that before. She got hit by bad weather, but she's going to go on for the next 10 days, doing all the greenways and finishing up on one that's on the way down in Middleton. I'll be joining her for some of it, and the idea is through journalism to meet people, see where they're at on climate change, climate action, climate justice, pop it out on social media and so on, but also populate a few of the pages in our magazine, Changing Ireland, with it. Right. And that is read by policymakers. And it's just one tiny example. There's so much going on around the country, but we're a media organisation, and it's so I tried to log on to Twitter there to give you the link, but I can't do everything at one time. But if you go on to Changing Ireland on Twitter, you'll find Grace somewhere along the way. And please give us ideas or suggestions. They don't have to be from counties that she's going through. It's just to try to, as the country's coming back to so-called normal, traffic rates are through the roof. And I think it's ironic and fantastic that we have Grace cycling in the rain in the opposite direction to Dublin.
So if your project is on a greenway somewhere, maybe you could link up with Alan and maybe get a visit from Grace and a bit of.
But it's very much for community groups, for anybody engaged in any kind of community gardening or social inclusion measure, anything at all that's community related, but in particular with a green focus, we're really interested in. We'd link it in with Grace's cycle.
Great,
Fantastic.
thanks, Alan. There's a couple of hands up, and I'm conscious that Minister O'Brien said he needs to leave shortly. So, Minister, I'll go to you, and then I will take Lee and then Brendan. So, Leanne.
Thanks a million, Jamie. Appreciate it. And sorry, I have to go early. I'm going to have to go to the chamber in 10 minutes. Look, just a level of assurance from me that in the new climate action plan, which is coming up in a few weeks, there's a very central position for the community and voluntary sector in it, in terms of engaging communities. And it's not just another expectation or role that's been thrown upon you without resourcing. We do hope there'll be some resourcing behind it as well. And obviously, in terms of my responsibilities here, I'll certainly be pushing strong in that regard. You know, it was mentioned by Jerry, I think there was a lack of town hall meeting type structures for the last consultation. We were a bit limited by COVID in that regard, but I can assure you, Minister Ryan is actually intending to go, once we have it out, to actually go around to every local authority area in the country as well, to push and to explain and to gain support for what needs to happen at a local level, all across the country. And I'll be tagging along where I can, and I've started to get out and about myself a little bit as well. I had hoped when I started doing that we'd have a climate action plan to talk about, but it's not quite ready yet. But in the next couple of years, hopefully, next couple of weeks, next couple of weeks, it'll be ready. And then finally, just if you do land on one call to action today, or even if you land on 2 or 3 calls to action today on the climate justice side of things, I'd very much like to hear what they are. If you can pass them on to me, please, I'd appreciate it. And sorry that I can't stay any longer.
Absolutely, Minister. We'll pass on the call to action to you, and look forward to working with you to implementing it, whatever it may be. And delighted to hear that there's a commitment to the central position of the community and voluntary sector in the climate action plan, and we look forward to engaging with you around that. As you can see from today, the sector is ready and willing, and I think as Mary pointed out, it's just a question of joining the dots. So that we can really support the equitable and fast and fair transition that we urgently require. So thank you, Minister.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Leanne, over to you. Thanks for waiting.
You're grand. I was going to try to get this in before I left for Sherlock. You'll listen to this at a later stage anyways, but I kind of sent in 2 links there. One was a link of Bounce Back Recycling Facebook page, and another was an article. It was just around climate kind of action that's currently ongoing at the moment within the Go With Travel movement, where Marshall Ward, I'm not sure if you all heard of Bounce Back Recycling. But it is an ongoing mattress recycling business that's actually up and going, and it's going very well, and it's very good for encouraging community groups to come together, also encouraging participation, but also employment, because travellers, it's stated that it's 80% of travellers unemployed and find it difficult of getting employment. And as part of the climate change, the bounce back recycling is hugely beneficial, obviously, for going forward, because just recently the bounce back recycling won an NGO Green Award, and it is a brilliant initiative because it currently started off with just three staff, and now it's gone up to 12. And so far they've recycled 50,000 mattresses and dismantled them by hand. And what's currently ongoing at the moment is they're hoping to look at the recyclable objects that they have dismantled by hand and look at different kind of initiatives of what they could do to recycle it. So it could be the case of maybe installation or different fabrics. We're currently at the moment within GTM, we're doing a recyclable project as well with women, which is the upholstery. And we're doing that's currently ongoing at the moment. But as part of the climate action, if there was these kind of projects and initiatives and opportunities for disadvantaged communities and groups will be very beneficial going forward, because say we're finding at the moment with the bounce back recycling that it's hugely beneficial, that it's bringing back the old traditional part of recycling, which is hugely important as part of the tribal community, and bringing it forward, and also encouraging and promoting employment opportunities as well as saving the environment. So that's my pitch.
Yeah, fantastic.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's really exciting to hear about that project. I wasn't aware of it myself, and it really, to my mind, just shows, you know, that the links are there to be made. You know, that climate action and sustainable development work can really bring clear co-benefits in terms of social enterprise, in terms of supporting marginalized communities, and you know, we've huge opportunities when it comes to addressing climate change and driving forward the agenda for justice and equality. So thanks, Liana. We might come back to you in a few minutes to hear more about that. And I see Alan has also put in the chat a comment there, and Grace being in Galway, and if you're available to meet her, he'd appreciate it. But to head on now to, I can't remember who was next, Fran or Brendan. So whichever one of you would like to.
Shall I go then?
Yeah, okay, go ahead, Fran. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. A bit like the minister, I've got to leave in a minute as well, so I wanted to get my tuppence worth in. Just in terms of call to action, something that Mary said that struck me, particularly as a community worker dealing with very marginalized communities, disadvantaged people, and this whole idea of inclusion. We're going to really have to look at the language of how we communicate the message of climate change to the most marginalized people in order to ensure that there is a just transition. Because for want of a better expression, they've got to own the problem. If it is a problem, people have got to take a bit of ownership of it themselves. And it's probably stating the obvious, but if you're hungry or you don't have a roof over your head, or all of these difficulties that people have experienced and has it for years and years and years, trying to talk to people about climate change in a very technical language is very, very difficult. So I think, one, we've got to look at how we communicate the message, how we get people to take ownership of their own little estate, their own house, their own rubbish bin, that local level, and then moving from, I suppose, the personal to the local, to the community, and much further down the line, thinking about the global issues, but particularly for the marginalized groups that we deal with, it's not on their list of priorities.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to say that. It's on my list of priorities, but it's not on their list. And the big challenge for us is to communicate that to people, why you should be part of the solution and not be a passive part of the problem. That's it.
Mary, I wonder if there's anything you want to say in response to that, because you're.
No, I just think, I totally agree with Fran. It's like the messaging is critical, but it's not just a packaging exercise. I mean, we have to realize as a sector as well that a lot of the problems that we're trying to address, you know, you can't separate climate change or the environment from them. Like, as I said, I think earlier, you know, we're finding a lot more of those issues with the groups we're working with are compounded by it. So even just to give an example of in Donegal with the, you know, the mica issue at the moment in housing, we're working with families affected by mica, and they're now looking into potentially, you know, a winter with, increased sort of storms and that, which has been affected by climate change, and it's starting to see those links, you know. So it's sort of an example, I suppose, of how something that you consider it's such a salient issue, right, in Donegal, that people wouldn't ordinarily think of climate change, but we need to start drawing those links and supporting them to understand that, why it's important. So yeah, but I totally agree. Yeah.
Thanks, Mary. Brendan, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm very glad to be part of this. I came in late to the whole event and quickly looked around, which was the one I wanted to join. This climate justice is sort of thing. I'm the development officer out on Clare Island at the moment, And I'm also a member of the European Small Islands Network and Cógáil and the Hare and various different these things. Now, it's only 2 years since I moved into this. I actually worked abroad for a long time. And I'm just finding that there is a complete separation between reality and discussion between government, local, national, and islands. Now, I'm sure this is sort of thing, and I was very interested, Mary, to hear, you know, in Inishowen and whatever, and Jerry's comments. But you know, the Department of Rural and Community Development is developing the first policy specifically for offshore islands in 26 years. And they thought that they could come out to the island and do the consultation in 3 hours in the middle of the day, you know, in a weekday when everybody's working. We never have meetings before 8 p.m. in the evening because everybody's working, you know, I mean, you know, and there's just this complete lack of understanding. And then of course, they couldn't come out because the weather was too bad. I mean, it was great, like sort of, you know, they couldn't come out because the weather was too bad to come to the island. And then COVID hit and they couldn't do it. So they eventually offered us that we could have a little focus group, you know, maybe 7 people. And so I immediately like got back to them and said, that's not a consultation. You know, I mean, you know, our community, there's more than 7 groups here. There's more sort of interests, and there's lots of groups that don't talk to one another. You know, so like, you know, that is not the thing. And really, we've had a complete lockdown on them, and just a lack of understanding of what consultation is all about. And I'd have to say that as well, the islands organizations, when I come in this from outside and from working on consultative processes or my participatory process with local communities for many years abroad, but I come back in here and I said, it's like development. I kind of feel that a lot of the development officers, because a lot of the people who are representing the islands are from the development officers, and that they don't understand what consultation is about. They might understand what it's about locally, about like sort of, you know, trying to get some things in locally, but how to take that to the political level and to the decision makers. There's you know, it's like there's a culture of, you know, coming and sort of saying, asking like the master, what can we have? You know, what can we have? And I'm not, you know, and I don't mean to disparage anybody. It's just to say that the system is set up in this sort of way of like sort of, we're asking for what we can have as opposed to for what we have a right to. And, you know, this consultation process, which is going on, there's been no policy research done. You know, it's kind of an overview thing done from the department, but there's no policy papers which have been prepared profoundly by either the department or by the islands groups. You know, there's sort of one-page thing on an agriculture thing, but it's like there's no research into, well, what are your legal rights? I was interested, Jerry, when you were talking there about like sort of, you know, the legal rights under environmental and human rights legislation and all that. This should be done, but of course there's no funding for it. And there's no system whereby, you know, they can bring it together. Now, Mary, you made a good point about getting in touch with the organizations that are out there. And, you know, I suppose this is what we have to do. But as with all of you, it's a kind of a one-man show when you're the development officer, you know, on a small place. And it's that challenge between like dealing with the daily thing that the telephone lines, you know, have been on the ground for 2 years. And the telephone company just doesn't respond. They say, well, we got to get 5 telephone poles. Well, that might be another 2 years, you know, and there's no, you know, lines go down. There's no communication. We're just on a point of we've got a large pilot project going with Apple and Cisco and the digital transformation group at the HSE, which might have Clare Island as the, you know, the focal point for a national pilot project on virtual health. No? And my interest in this, and the reason why I'm promoting this, is because I'm trying to draw attention to the island, because were ignored, like just ignored outside the process. And when these consultations go on, and I'm sorry to say this happens in the, you know, in the community partnerships and this thing, whatever, and when they do the Mayo development plan, they have meetings and say, oh yes, we have meetings all around. Nobody from the islands, like nobody from the islands. And there's just there's this part of it, you know. I'm sorry, I went on a lot there. There's a lot there. By the way, I've decided to go to Glasgow. Yeah, I've decided to go to Glasgow. If any of you can help me to get registered, I've been in this before. I was a COP in Peru and in some of these things before. I used to work with the Peruvian Environmental Law Society, and I've recently been working with a group. We've just done a little video on the rights of nature and can we get the rights of nature recognised in Ireland? You know,
so that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they were actually from the north, and they got in touch with me because I did some work on you know,
yeah,
this stuff. But like if you can get back to me, and if anybody can sort of
Brendan, I
to the door.
I'd suggest if you drop in your email address in the chat box here, it might be the easiest way, because I don't know how we'll be able to connect up otherwise, whether or not they'll give us all each of those details. And same for anybody else who wants to stay connected. If you drop your email in the chat, we can connect that way. So we have 20 minutes left. We're still working towards our call for action. What I'm hearing from people is, you know, we've heard from Mary and Leanne about, you know, really practical actions that community workers are taking around connecting with communities on climate change. But there's still, as Fran said, a disconnect between the language that's being used that can be alienating and isolating. And we also have this issue around consultations, and you know, it's come up from a number of speakers, both here and in the plenary, about really the state not really understanding how to engage in meaningful consultation with people. So I think that feels like it's an important point. I'm not sure how we'll capture it yet, but we've still got 20 minutes to go. And Kieran, you have your hand up there, so I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I mean, I just add my comments to the last couple of speakers, and add my comments to this issue of consultation and the need to speak to as many people. And I can tell Brendan's frustration there on the islands, and I know how he's talking about. I work with Leader Partnership Company, which is presently consulting with former Bord na Móna workers here in the Roscommon, Longford area. So you can imagine some of the discussions and debates I'm participating in at the moment with regard to climate change. Now, it really, you know, there's 10 different reasons why we are where we are with this situation. It was a longer period of time intended for these workers to come to grips with the situation. But the reality is, within 8 months, their jobs were gone. And now I'm back with them talking about maybe putting together a master plan, community master plan for them. And it's not easy. So I think consultation would be the one. In fact, I've gone out to them this afternoon, so I'll be popping away early as well. But I'm just wondering if people can maybe give you an idea how we can bring that issue up to the top of the agenda, so that in future people don't lose their jobs overnight without any just transition.
Jerry, you're our policy guru here today. Have you any thoughts on what we could be campaigning for as the community sector to ensure this doesn't happen again?
Well, Kieran, first of all, I really feel for you. I mean, essentially, the reason that you are in this position is because the department was informed, I'd say the best part of 15 years ago, that we essentially needed to come away from peat and end the use of peat for power generation, also ending the stripping of peat, and that there needed to be a proper just transition plan put in place a long time ago. So we're left in a situation where ye on the ground are struggling, and you should never have been put in that situation in the first place. Moving on from that, so there is just a couple of different things. There is a just transition bill that the Soc Dems, the Social Democrats, have tabled in the Dáil. It actually builds on a previous Green Party bill when they were in opposition, which seeks to put in place sort of a long-standing or permanent Just Transition Commission. You might have seen that there was a Just Transition Commissioner appointed a couple of years ago at this stage who did a bit of planning, but that needs to be a permanent structure. I mean, I think what I think also needs to happen is that this isn't simply about supporting the workers, although they entirely need to be foremost in our mind, but it's also about supporting the wider community. So that means that, you know, it's not simply about putting in place funds or seeking to support workers to transition to new jobs. I think that's often sort of thrown out in quite a flippant way, but about trying to regenerate the entire community. And I'm aware that under EU Just Recovery funding that Ireland is receiving, that they are preparing a specific plan. I can get to the details of it for the Midlands. And I think some of that is going to be focused in on retrofitting, but not all of it. It's going to be broader than that. But I'm conscious, I don't know to what extent, Kieran, that's helpful to you, but I think the just transition piece needs to be a core part of our new climate action plan, which is expected in a few weeks. And I think really the Department of the Environment needs to be linking in with you directly, you know, as opposed to merely just responding to a consultation. I don't know how helpful that is for you now, Kieran.
Oh, it's great. Thanks very much for your comments. I mean, we are familiar with the EU SMART program coming down the line, all right, with those just recovery funding in it and its substantial assistance. But I think, as I say, I'm kind of hitting the first barrier, which is the lack of consultation that got us here, and it's just a barrier in terms of trying to do my work with those groups at the moment, you know.
Yeah. Thanks, Kieran. Yeah, and thanks, Jerry, for that. I see Fran's hand up again. If you have your hand up with the reaction button, I'd just ask you to put it down again, so I know who was actually asking the question. And Fran, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to, not really in response to Kieran, it's not much of a help, but it's more a general thing about consultation. I go back to what Mike Ryan was saying, that I would tend towards the whole idea of when you're consulting with communities, you consult and you get communities to prioritize. Because far too often the mistake is making, maybe it's the nature of the client, this nature of Irish politics, but a consultation really, a lot of the time, for people who are going to it, they're going to it with a list of demands. And they want to be able to articulate all of the difficulties and the problems. But actually, part of this whole notion about consensus building is that you're consulted about a particular issue, but you're also offered an opportunity to prioritize what's most important to you. That's also very, very empowering, because as well as being someone bringing a problem, inevitably with a consultation issue, what happens is that somebody is bringing a problem to you and they're consulting you about the problem. But I think consulting people about the solution is equally important, or else the consultation is over and everybody goes home and they moan about it years later because nothing was done. And on some occasions it happens with a consultation, as in with people's personal life. They don't want something fixed, they want to be heard.
Yeah.
They simply want to be heard. And I think all of these things should feed into the whole idea about just transition and consultation processes. I've been through so many of them, and if people felt they didn't get exactly what they demanded, the whole process was rubbished. There's an old expression that says, you're absolutely entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to be agreed with. And that's the struggle that we're going to have to deal with.
Thanks, Fran. Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of what Mike Ryan was saying about, you know, the fundamental importance of dignity, and these processes need to start there. You know, that we need to give people voice and listen to each other as human beings. There's a couple of people we haven't heard from yet, so I'm going to ask anybody who hasn't spoken to take the floor. But before we do, just a reminder, we've got 12 minutes left to come up with our call for action. So be thinking about that, and I'll come back to everybody at the end when we've heard from those who haven't spoken. So Hayley, you have your hand up first.
Yeah, I'm working with the Community Development Project in Youghal, and also with the Youghal Blue and Green Network. We're we've just got a consultant to do an energy master plan as well there. I guess the point I wanted to raise, in a way it's a little thing, but it's about how many communities are sort of disenfranchised from this. We've talked about the language and that there's this theoretical stuff that doesn't address people's daily needs. So one of the approaches we've taken is, I mean, it's to take a creative approach in how we raise awareness. So for example, we did an event with an older people's group that was a storytelling project, and it was stories about climate change. So there's this event where peers are talking to each other about their experiences, and you could see that people were getting more awareness of the bigger picture because they're hearing from their peers. So I mean, that is quite a small action in its way. We're trying to do similar stuff through community garden projects or through kind of nature walks and stuff that are public events. But it's to stress how important I think it is. That thing we said has been said about, well, I'm paraphrasing it, framing the language to the group so that the group is hearing, or the community is hearing what you're saying in their own language, and also the value of peer-led awareness. So if we have these, 12 older people that tell the stories, they've all gone off and talked to 12 friends and gone, I never realized that this was connected to this and stuff. And it's something we need to extend that, and we need to somehow embed that form of practice within the work that we're doing in this area. But I think it's just very useful to think of, sometimes we kind of separate, there's climate change here, there's arts and crafts over there, and just the value of creative approaches, artistic approaches, and that's something, it's by no means a call to action, and I know that's what we're looking for, but I think it is something to be borne in mind, that the way to reach people is not by telling them things, it's about getting them to create something themselves. That's my thoughts. Thanks.
God, I wish we had another hour to go, Hayley. That was, yeah, I think that was really, very interesting point. And the point that I take from what you're saying is that, again, that focus on solutions and on positive action that Fran was making. That it's not just about the problem, but actively getting people involved in the solution and in designing the solution to the problem. So, Alan, your hand is up, but I'm just conscious we haven't heard from Mary, from Lisa, or Anthony, so I want to give them the chance to say something if they want to. I know there's decades of wisdom, collective wisdom between you, so.
I'll just throw my tuppence in, Jamie. Jamie, I think that because Europe are going to be the ones who are asking so much of us when it comes to 2030. I know we all have a collective obligation to meet the requirements of 2030, but I also think that Europe need to really row in behind us on this. And if it comes down to getting the checkbook out, I think that's what needs to happen. At the end of the day, marginalized communities are going to be paying the price in some shape or form if we don't meet this deadline of 2030. So I do think that Europe has a special obligation to really help us out in this department, and it's going to take huge resources and huge funding. So I think that that has to be looked at.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, they're making a start in terms of the European Green Deal and the Just Recovery Fund to earmark a certain amount of money for kicking off the European Green Deal, and so there are things that we can definitely build on. But you're right, there's going to be a huge amount of money coming down the line to address climate change, and the challenge and the question for us is how do we make sure that is distributed equitably and fairly, and supports those hard to reach communities.
Yeah, actually, Jamie, sorry, just to come in, because I was thinking about the call to action. I suppose that is a big question I had coming in today for, the grip for all of us is looking at the end of the day, what can we do, with climate action and just transition? And it's about equality proofing, right? I mean, that's what we're in the business of across our issues. And so I wondered, what do people feel we need as a sector to help us prepare to be able to do that and play an active role in that?
I'll say something, seeing as I haven't said something, but I actually work with Fran, and the two of us ended up in the same group. But greetings from Wexford, everybody. I suppose, look at the things, I think, going back to what Mike Ryan said about participation, and really for those who don't have a voice to actually have a voice and to be listened to, because I totally agree with the whole issue of the consultation for the sake of consultation and the actual lack of listening as part of it. And consultation tends to be tick a box, but like, we're working every day with communities who are living in horrendous housing conditions that like retrofitting is just, you know, actual housing is an issue, let alone retrofitting. And really a lot of it, it's very hard. On the one hand, we have this kind of thing that we as workers maybe in the sector see as tokenistic, and then you have actual people on the ground who, to them, this is a little part, but it's not. And I think that's the key thing for community development, is that translation into the fact that you know, it's having an impact. Like, we work in Enniscorthy here, and it has the highest air pollution levels. You know, you're talking all the social detriments, and if we can translate that somehow to make people see the real impact, and that's a job in itself, is like, just, you know, that message about like, this is impacting. Like, there are other communities we work with, Courtown, where it's eroding away, you know, and there's all these developed houses, and they haven't, like North Wexford, we all saw the headlines about water. So if we can kind of bring it back to some of the basics, like the air we breathe, the water that we drink, you know, like a huge population in North Wexford the last couple of weeks, massive issues with water. You know, similarly to Donegal and Micah, like, these are fundamental basic needs, and all we kind of get pushed on narratives around carbon tax the whole time. You know, now that's, you know, a bit jumbled, but
no, Mary, I think that's a really important perspective and some really important points you're making there. What would you say is the one thing that we collectively as community workers need to be doing now to address all of that?
Well, really, I think the participation from you know, and for the people who will be affected the most to actually truly have a voice, because, you know, look at, there has been references to democracy, and I think this is hugely linked, and, you know, the erosion of local democracy, and, you know, active citizenship, and of actually listening to people, and that is, you know, there's big faceless institutions and big faceless, and people are feeling really disconnected, you know, and I don't think COVID would have helped that, but look at, it might also be an opportunity. I'm forever the optimist, but I think participation, and to have that hugely, and to bring it back to the people, because sometimes green issues are seen as middle class. Not an issue that a traveller in Enniscorthy who's, you know, got a respiratory illness, you know, is dealing with. But yeah, I think that whole, to really, like, young people, yeah, definitely you see a lot more activity, but it needs to be owned by a greater number of the community, I think, and that'll only be done by participation and having discussions and conversations where you don't need an action at the end of, you know, but just that whole, like, broad awareness and real issues, rather than, you know, pretend issues or tokenistic box ticking.
Jamie,
go ahead, Fran.
I'll just jump in. Forgive me, I have to leave. I have to go meet my local social welfare officer. Agreed with all of that, but in terms of a call to action, 4 words: talk less and listen more. I think it might be a useful thing, because stuff is coming at people all of the time, and the whole idea of consultation, it should be about listening to people articulate their own issues. And what Mary-Louise said is absolutely correct. The air you breathe, the water you drink, the landscape around you, make it local, right down to, I think as Mary was saying, the little green that people play in, their locality, what they can do in their locality. But as regards the policy makers, when it comes to the consultation, those 4 words: talk less, listen more.
Could I add? Yeah, Fran, could I add to that? And thanks, Claire. It was just the Dev Ed approach offers so much in connecting north and south. I'm in touch directly with Fisher people, families in the Gambia who I have to reply to today. They are really feeling the impact of all sorts of different challenges in their lives that I could name, but climate change is a big one. And the Gambia, for example, is a very flat, soon to be, their capital city will be gone in 50 years, gone. It's a small capital, but we need to listen also to and connect local, global, and it's very hard to listen because these people don't have, they're struggling like people in our society are struggling, but connect and collaborate with the NGO sector in Ireland. I mean the foreign NGO, do you know what I mean? The Tropers, the goals, the solidarity movements connected with poor countries abroad.
Great, thanks, Alan. Leanna.
Hey, I'm just we're talking about like climate change and stuff like that. Like, let's say in the accommodation, like in Galway City here at the moment, we have a Caribrown where there's temporary and then there's permanent site of families, and then the city council has that large amount of families, which is nearly 7. By the time you look at this, there's about 72, I think, or something, between families and kids, and living beside a toxic waste, which is, toxic enough, living beside that. So we're all about climate change, we're all about improving that. And yes, there's no improvement of, health around that, because that is toxic landfill that's there as well, that's affecting families, but also the environment as well. And there's still no improvements.
Yeah, and I'm aware that GTM has been campaigning on that issue for a long time, and it's a disgrace that the city council is continuing to cite people next to that dump. It really is.
Jimmy, is there something around messaging then, agreeing some sort of common kind of approach to our messaging as a sector?
I'm
just wondering, just from what some of the participants have said there, and like I know Fran had said 2 points there. One was on messaging and us sort of listening as well in consultations. With the consultations though, I wondered, is it about just trying to meaningfully engage with spaces that we're invited into, or is it also about creating our own spaces?
Yeah. Oh, I'm just seeing here we have a final extra 5 minutes. God, we can all breathe a sigh of.
Okay, good.
Right, we've got 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably both, Mary, in terms of making use of existing and creating new, because I don't consider existing consultation practices to be fit for purpose. But going back to what was said previously, I fully agree with Mary Louise about making the link to people's basic needs, and how you've made that point as well, Mary. It's also a quality of life issue, and I appreciate that a lot of the discussion around emissions and impacts is very abstract and high level, and Fran's point around making it local is a really good one. I am just conscious of, when we say that they need to listen more, I am just very conscious of the polite nodding and yes, we've listened to you, pat you on the head type response. There definitely does need to be more listening than talking from government side, but I think it would be useful to be maybe a bit more specific. And I just want two final points on my side. I mean, Friends of the Earth would have a huge focus on the need to organise, to activate, to get for people to get involved at family level in their home, or at family level in their business, at work, in their community, to raise up the issue at any level that they feel comfortable with. And the reason I say that is because I think there is a tendency for messaging from government to make it believe that it's all at the responsibility of the individual. And there was a good line, I think, from Catherine Hayhoe, or is it Bill McKibben, that screwing in a new system is more important than screwing in a light bulb. So it's this focus on system change coming from community level. And then I'm sure it's something that you're all very probably familiar with in the community sector. I'm sure Mary is, but the real focus on women's empowerment, that not only do they suffer the worst impacts, but the more they are involved in decision making, the better climate outcomes as well.
Just as I was listening to you speak there, Jerry, I was jotting down some thoughts on it. So this is a proposal for a call to action that and I'm trying to kind of synthesize what everyone is saying, and then I'll pass over to you, Anthony. So what about this as a call to action for community workers? We need to fight for structures of participatory democracy that are fit for purpose, meaning that they're equality proofed, meeting people where they're at, collective, empowering, and solutions focused.
And I think just like the BBR initiative as well, it would be a good guide going forward for, you know, community groups as well, for having, like, you know what I mean, that kind of opportunity for the climate change, but also employment and other solutions. So it would be positive. Positive.
Yeah, sorry, it's just my view, so it's my view, but I've seen brilliant work done in Dublin inner city among women's groups where they linked with poor communities of women in I don't know, is it in India or where, but they were empowered themselves through that process, and they could identify the issues that the women in India, say, experienced were similar to what they faced in their communities. I really think it's a missed opportunity not to avail of, like, we've hundreds of millions of euro going in through Irish Aid, Trócaire and all that, but there's also voluntary organisations connected. You're missing a big opportunity to link the poverty abroad that is caused by our way of living with climate action.
Yeah.
So if you want to miss that opportunity, that's how I see it. I really, we live in a connected world. Jesus, look at all the petrol station holdings.
We've connected farmers, actually, and we've connected farmers in Donegal with farmers in Uganda. We've collected female political aspirants in, well, we're trying to get more Donegal female local councillors. There's only 4 out of 37, crazy. So we've connected them then with, through Trócaire, with female political aspirants in Sierra Leone. And Uganda as well. So I absolutely agree with you, and it works quite well. You know, people often sort of think it won't, but connecting the local and global is